It's no strange occurrence that many black people now constantly makes negative statements about our own racial group and constantly speaks favorably about Caucasians in spite of a horrific, brutal history to the contrary. This noted black mindset that clearly benefits the white society is far too widespread amongst black people to be coincidental. It's by deliberate design. It's always by deliberate design whenever the oppressed starts thinking in ways that benefits the oppressors. This noted black mindset has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. Those who believe that myth does so because they're in fact ignorant of how true brainwashing is actually achieved. Whenever people are ignorant, they'll always believe nonsense. That slave syndrome myth presents what would in fact be the least effective method used for controlling generations of people. It's simply not how true brainwashing is achieved. Usually people have the right to believe whatever they choose to believe. But there's a profound exception to this rule when it comes to the oppressed. The oppressed must gain a true, clear, and accurate understanding of our plight and condition. Because if our understandings are flawed, then all liberating remedies and strategies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. Our core problem is that the ignorant ones have been made overconfident and the intelligent ones have been made to feel self-doubting. Furthermore, the ignorant ones are so stubbornly ignorant of their own ignorance that they literally argue fiercely against those of us that presents any true facts that are contrary of the lies they've been misled to believe. They literally make enemies of those of us who tries to elevate and free their minds. This scenario has allowed the flawed beliefs held by the ignorant ones to prevail throughout our communities, thus keeping the black masses trapped believing in falsehoods. This is why those who know the truth must teach. African proverb. The truth of our plighted condition is that white oppressive forces exploits their monopoly over information and media images that are fed into the collective minds of the black masses to manipulate us to think in ways that are against our own self-interest and in ways that instead serve the interests of their white society. To put it more bluntly, they subdue unified black protests and make us more compliant with their white dominance over our lives. White social scientists describe the nefarious hidden practice as merely instilling a value system into the collective minds of black people that makes us adhere to the authority and existing infrastructure of the dominant white culture. It's how white social engineering scientists protects the white society from massive unified black retribution and rebellion. Regardless of how intelligent people are, if it's possible to control the input into the collective minds of a targeted population, it's entirely possible to control what the targeted population will believe. The white society has exploited its monopoly over the input of what's systematically fed into the minds of black people to shrewdly instill a value system into the subconscious minds of black people that serves and protects the system of white supremacy. It's literally mental slavery. And those black people who don't critically think never notices their mental chains. There are 4 ways to effectively manipulate the human mind: by what we're taught, by what we see, by what we hear, and through constant repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, the media images we see, the societal narratives that we hear, and through repetition of subliminal messages, white oppressive forces have manipulated millions of black people to think in ways that are against our own interests and instead in ways that serve their white society. This is our hidden reality. Because they control the information that we hear and the media images that we see, this allows them to literally shape our minds. It's the true reason why many black people are now self-loathing, perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history of discrimination and oppression. It's always by design when the oppressed thinks the way that serves the oppressors. White oppressive forces have also exploited their monopoly over the input of information and media image that black people receive to manipulate our minds to believe the unbelievable, to normalize the abnormal, to accept the unacceptable, and to defend the indefensible. This is why millions of us now self-identify ourselves as niggers, called all women bitches and hoes, glorifies pimps, sags our pantses below our asses, defends the Bible that was brutally beaten into submission within the blood-soaked minds of our ancestors, and we get our morals from a Bible written by the most ungodliest people we've ever encountered. And we pray to the false god of the ungodly oppressors. These noted practices are not normal, not acceptable, nor defendable, but these practices are now held by millions of black people. White oppressive forces have literally manipulated the minds of black people to think in ways that literally insults our own intelligence. This is not some silly conspiracy theory. This is not some feeble attempt to absolve ourselves of our own responsibility by wrongly blaming whites, as many have been programmed to respond. It's the absolute truth. The white society controls all aspects of our lives, and they tell us what to think and what to believe. Through the skillful, sustained use of disinformation propaganda campaigns, continued miseducation, and repetitive news media subliminal programming, white oppressive forces have created a mental prison for the minds of black people. Let's start with negative social engineering, negative media social engineering of the African American culture. Because the white society controls the media images of black people, this allows white oppressive forces to negatively steer black culture while misleading us to believe that we're negatively guiding ourselves. Most people naively believe that the media reflects our reality, but in truth, it's more often we that imitate what we see and learn from the media. Whoever controls a people's media images controls their culture. Because a group's identity is greatly shaped by how they repeatedly see themselves depicted within the media. People often become those derogatory media depictions of themselves that they've accepted as being their reality. It's a true science known as media social engineering. Because the white society controls the media images of African Americans, this fact allows white social scientists and white propagandists to negatively steer the African American culture. It's the truth they don't want you to ever learn. Media social engineering is not a silly conspiracy theory. It's a real covert, very well crafted system of control that allows the white ruling class to control the masses and targeted population. It's the truth that they hide from you. The hidden fact is that much of what millions of African Americans perceive as being our own swagger are actually the results of negative media social engineering created by white oppressive forces. The ability of white social scientists and propaganda designers to steer black culture through their monopoly over our media images is extremely powerful. So much, in fact, that they wanted black youths to start walking around every day with a yellow afro comb and a left rear pocket. All they would have to do was place that image in several rap videos, movies, and TV shows being depicted as cool and trendy. In doing so, many of our black youths will then begin imitating the same style and behavior, and many will insist that they created the style themselves when they have in fact not. It's the result of media social engineering. This style and behavior is a learned one from how they saw themselves depicted within the media. Our youths become those media depictions of themselves that they accept as being their reality. When these white social engineering scientists create trends and customs for black youths to imitate, they deliberately create those that get our black youths acting and dressing as caricatures that reinforces resentment and anti-black prejudice perception. Moreover, those images that reinforces many negative racist stereotypes about black people. Black youths become the caricatures and the derogatory images and stereotypes that they've accepted. Negative media social engineering is the true reason why millions of African Americans now call themselves niggers, thugs, bitches, and hoes, sag their pants, glorifies pimps. Because we African Americans were stripped of our true identity and culture during slavery of our ancestors, we are therefore more susceptible to media social engineering. Now, I just explained how white oppressive forces negatively steered the black culture through their monopoly over our media images. Now, I will demonstrate how they negatively influence our culture through their monopoly over narratives. White negative media social engineering is being used to demoralize and divide us. Here's why it didn't. During the 1960s, African Americans' unified black protests against the U.S. system of white supremacy was unprecedented. African Americans confronted it on all fronts. It was confronted through civil disobedience tactics, militant means, nonviolent protests, and with black lawyers pleading for equality within America's highest Supreme Courts. African American unified protest still remains unrivaled by any other racial group in U.S. history. African Americans had unknowingly proven themselves as being the greatest threat against the U.S. system of white supremacy. In the face of such unprecedented unified black protests, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said that the unification of the American Negro was the greatest threat against the nation. To remedy what was then called the Negro problem, in 1967, President Lyndon Johnson put together a committee called the Kerner Commission. Their assignment was to study the Negro problem, find the cause for the problem, and then develop solutions to address it. In 1968, white social scientists determined that the unprecedented unified black protest was caused by an elevated and unifying black collective self-esteem brought on by the emergence of the Black Pride movement. They also learned while studying African Americans that while the white society, through a weaponry advantage of guns and cannons, were able to invade, colonize, and enslave black people, they, however, cannot win our loyalty or sustain peace indefinitely with black people unless our minds have been manipulated to prevent us from seeking retribution against the white oppressive society. Because whenever people are oppressed for long periods, their collective aggressions toward their oppressors will continue to grow until acts of massive rebellion becomes inevitable. The oppressed always eventually rebels against their oppressors. This is an inherent response within the collective human psyche whenever people are held under long-term oppression. This is what was actually happening amongst the African American population during the 1960s. White racism had reached a boiling point within the collective minds of African Americans, which resulted in that decade's unprecedented unified protests. Those white social scientists logically determined that they could subdue unified black protests by keeping us demoralized, divided, self-loathing, and by keeping black collective aggression shifted away from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. It's being done to us through unrelenting media manipulation. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of black people that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality is much more than just biased media reporting. It's actually a black racially demoralizing divide and conquer psychological warfare campaign. It's also called divide and rule psychological warfare campaign. Demoralized divide and conquer is a method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hate and division between them. It is a well-proven tactic that has been used for a long time by oppressors for controlling the oppressed. It is extremely effective because people can be easily controlled by the narratives they routinely receive about themselves. When people constantly receive fraudulent negative information about themselves, they become very demoralized. When the oppressed are heavily demoralized, this makes them much more compliant with the oppressor's dominance over their lives, and therefore it makes them much more easier to control. Furthermore, the constant, unrelenting demoralization also creates self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people, and we can then be ruled over indefinitely. And it doesn't matter that the information presented is untrue. Most black people will act according to the information because they've all received the same negative information about ourselves. This psychological warfare system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects black people to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. Presently, all narratives about black people are written exclusively by white people. This unfair scenario allows white oppressive forces to easily negatively shape how black people perceive ourselves collectively. They've transformed this scenario into their greatest weapon for controlling black people. Within this system, fraudulent black racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting mind of the black population without being challenged or counterbalanced by any equal amount of positive black racially affirming facts. It works upon the concept that the mind perception can be altered by controlling the information given to it. Its weapon is the message that it carries. It conveys a subliminal message that black people are now our own worst enemies and that we therefore need white people to govern over our lives. Moreover, that black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when black people are repetitively presented these noted narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied propaganda programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. Its weapon is the demoralizing message that it carries and the way that it adversely affects the black population in terms of our behaviors. With time being unable to refute the constant negative information being told about ourselves, many black people eventually comes to accept those terms. They internalize them. The constant taunting of negative propaganda unconsciously influence how many black people feel about our entire race, creating division and self-hatred among us. This system of control shifts black collective aggressions away from the white oppressive society and redirects it towards our own people. The basis of this concept of warfare works by affecting the subconscious minds of black people through unrelenting, demoralizing propaganda. It works by tapping into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave black people. Those black people who don't critically think never notices their mental change. This is our hidden reality. It has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is give them certain information every so often. Constantly give them certain information. And you can persuade an entire generation towards an implied objective. And again, it doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most black people will act upon the information because they've all been given the same misinformation about themselves. It is information warfare. This psychological warfare program provides the white society with a more proficient method for controlling black populations. For unlike the past racist system that black people can easily identify and therefore develop counter strategies against, this system is not easily recognized nor comprehended by its black victims. This psychological warfare program works so well, in fact, that it not only makes black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, in many cases, it makes black people prefer white dominance over our lives. It is it's the root of the profound division and self-hatred now afflicting so many black people. And it is at the heart of the internalized feelings of superiority that white people have, because they are all getting negative propaganda about us and favorable about themselves. They start looking down upon us. The oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst about themselves. Franz Fanon said it, and the white society count on that when they're feeding us negative propaganda about ourselves. Now, the white educational system's failure to adequately provide black students with a racially affirming curriculum, as it routinely does so for white students, is also being done for maintaining white dominance. Because for a ruling class to maintain its position of social dominance over the oppressed, they must condition the oppressed from a very early age to accept their own subordinate status and to adhere to the authority of the dominant culture. To do so, the education given to the oppressed from a time that their minds are young and most impressionable must be the type that denies them of a racially or culturally affirming curriculum. When the oppressed population is denied a racially affirming curriculum, this conditions them to accept their own subordinate status within a society dominated by their oppressors. In fact, when the oppressed are denied of a racially affirming education, even the brightest among them may have little, if any, hope of mentally extricating themselves from their assigned low dominant position in life. This is what's being done to black people within the white dominant society. It's the true reason why black people learn more black racially affirming facts from each other than we do so within our white governed schools. It's by design. Through their monopoly over information that black people systematically receives, white oppressive forces have brainwashed millions of black people to think in ways that serves and protects the interests of the white society. It's literally mental enslavement. Don't be fooled. If Caucasians were truly superior, they wouldn't have to tell so many lies, distort so many facts, nor work so hard behind the scenes to handicap and subjugate a people who they claim are inferior. The first step towards freeing your mind from white mental slavery begins with remembering that the white society has never earned the blind trust of black people. They especially don't have the credibility to control what we believe about ourselves, because they've been telling negative lies about black people for more than 400 years. We must train our minds to always remember these facts when receiving information that comes exclusively from the white sources. The additional step towards freeing our mind from white mental slavery begins with remembering that it's our worst enemies that are controlling what we believe. Moreover, that these enemies have proven themselves as being the most unethical, diabolical, and the most notoriously immoral, deceitful people throughout history. Whenever such a group of people are controlling the information that we receive, those type of people will always feed us lies that manipulates our mind to think in ways that give them greater power over us. It's the narcissistic and notoriously deceitful people they inherently are. It's the way they've always been, and it's the only way they know how to be. The reality. The reason? The white society's exploitation of Africans has provided with an era which has flourished most throughout history. To allow this era to end would be directly against the interests of the white society, especially given that the white society is still dependent on Africa's natural resources, and it continues indefinitely. This scenario resulted in the white society exploiting their monopoly over information that are systematically fed into the minds of black people to manipulate us to think in ways that allows the white society to continue their exploitation of black people without any black resistance. We call this system the Black People's Matrix. It is time for us to wake up, to understand the reality of our plight. We'll never move ahead holding on to feeble premises about a biblical fairy tale or a slave syndrome myth. We must recognize that the white society deploys nefarious social science, nefarious psychological warfare to manipulate the minds of black people to think in ways that serve the white society. For example, in America, many African Americans are saying, "Oh, I'm so happy slavery happened. If slavery didn't happen, we've been living on the bushes in Africa." Our minds have aligned with the objective of the white society. That's why they denigrate the image of Africa. In Africa, because the curriculums are controlled by the Western powers, many black children in school are saying, "Oh, I'm so glad white people colonized Africa because we were illiterate before they came." And these are all lies. It was Africans who civilized Europe. But we are walking around, we are functioning based upon narratives that programs our minds to function in ways that benefits our enemies and that are against our own interests. We have millions of black people walk around saying, "Oh, we are worst enemies. We're our own worst enemies," not realizing that that's been embedded in their mind and those who believe that in their minds through the white society's monopoly over information. Information warfare is the tactic the white society deploys against us. We must elevate our minds. We must elevate our minds. We must wake up to our reality. One love and peace.